Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. This is the second will bring a multifaceted perspective to how diverse criminal justice disciplines are addressing these challenges, sharing their knowledge, and advancing science, technology, and law. Looks like my sound is cutting out, so we're going to go ahead and move into our webinar for today. Today's webinar is entitled Opioids and the Drain on Laboratory Resources. Your subject matter expert and presenter for today is Dr. Paul Speaker. Dr. Speaker is a faculty member of the West Virginia University Finance Department and the Chief Executive Officer of Forensic Science Management Consultants, LLC, a firm which specializes in the business of forensics using the forensics of business. He holds a PhD and master's from Purdue University and a bachelor's from LaSalle College. Dr. Speaker is the principal investigator for Project FORESIGHT, a business-guided analysis of forensic science laboratories. His Project FORESIGHT work with the forensic community has expanded to include business analysis for public health laboratories via a project with the Association of Public Health Laboratories. Here is our quick disclaimer. The opinions, findings, and conclusions or recommendations expressed in this presentation are those of the presenter and do not necessarily reflect those of the Department of Justice. Any products and manufacturers discussed are presented for informational purposes only and do not constitute product approval or endorsement by the U.S. Department of Justice. Again, I do apologize for my audio issues. We're going to go ahead and jump right into our presentation today. Dr. Speaker, if you'd like to go ahead and begin.
Thank you, Josh, and welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to be able to spend a little bit of time with you. Just a quick run-through of the things that I'll be covering in this webinar. First of all, just to set it up, I had a conversation a couple months ago with Dr. Jerry Ropero Miller from the Forensic Technology Center of Excellence, really inquiring about the data that we had and that we have from Project FORESIGHT and what it might be able to tell about the opioid crisis. And if you notice my affiliation, it is with West Virginia University. So I'm located in a state that is really dealing with some of the greatest severity of this problem. It's an interest not only to me but across the university. And so looking more deeply into this is an extremely important thing for us locally as well as what goes on nationally. So what I'm going to talk about here is a little bit of background on Project FORESIGHT for those of you who are not familiar. In that, I'll give you an idea of what we have. I'm going to use data that we have collected primarily from the 2016 fiscal year, although I do have some trending data over time that we do want to be able to mention. One of the things I'll do is show you some of the trends that are going on, not just nationally but internationally, with respect to a couple areas of investigation within forensic laboratories. And then I'm going to show you some data from an unnamed and anonymous laboratory, but one that's located in a region that is feeling a bit of the pinch from overdoses and the opioid crisis. And then I'll talk briefly about Project FORESIGHT 2020 that was mentioned in the introduction, and some things that are going to be coming available through ASCLD for all laboratories, some freeware that makes it a little bit easier to extract data, and a little bit on how that will improve our questions that we have with respect to the current crisis with respect to opioids, and then a little bit on some of the other research that we're having. So I please invite you to throw your questions out there, and we will have time at the end here to be able to deal with those. So place those in that chat area as they come up. The other thing with this is somebody had inquired earlier about the slide deck that I'm going to be going through, and you will find that a PDF version will be available to anybody that wants to have that, to be able to download. There are a couple references that I will have in here to some websites, and the list of those URLs will also be available to you. And I've got a couple interactive polls that we're going to be dealing with in here just to make sure we keep you awake. So sit back and hopefully enjoy what we're going to be able to go through and pose your questions as they come up. So first, Project FORESIGHT. Project FORESIGHT is something that came through as part of the Forensic Science Initiative at West Virginia University. Shortly after the FBI made the decision to move its fingerprint identification facilities to West Virginia, individuals at the university recognized a great opportunity to provide educational opportunities for anybody who wanted to be able to go into the forensic sciences as a career. And the Forensic Science Initiative was begun, and many of you may be familiar with Max Hauck, who really led the charge in where we were going with respect to projects within the university. Part of that was Max was very interested in trying to put more of an industry perspective to forensic sciences, to be able to say across laboratories, what can you learn from each other? How do we gather the information and share it and begin to do very pointed research in this area? So what we wanted to be able to do here was to say, well, what is it that you're attempting to do? What do you have in common with other laboratories? And that led us to something where we would begin to look at it that generally reading mission statements of laboratories, what most labs, besides truth, justice, and the American way, when you dug into it, was to try to process with quality, process correctly as many cases as possible given the resources at your disposal. So that's part of what I wanted to look at here is what does the data begin to describe to us about what is happening within the forensic laboratory in terms of those limited resources? How is it beginning to push things in various directions? So with this, what we do in Project FORESIGHT is we collect data on casework, and in the casework information would be cases by area of investigation to how many items are being submitted to the laboratory, samples that are taken from those items, tests that are run, reports that are written, and so on. We also collect information on the budgets, and we want to know how are expenditures across the laboratory. So what's being put into personnel in each area of investigation? What are the capital expenditures? What are the consumables? And what are the overheads? And really looking at a fully loaded type of expenditure. And then some information on the deployment of human resources. So where are technical personnel being placed? Where are support and administrative people being placed? What do we have with that? And the project has been going for quite some time. Our earliest data comes from the year 2005 fiscal year, and we're collecting it all the way through the present. So we're about to put out our solicitations for fiscal 2017 data submissions. It is voluntary, so the results that I'm able to show, this is not from a random sample, but from a voluntary sampling, but it's now gotten to a large enough number. We had 139 submissions last year that we're getting a pretty good feel for across the board for the industry. The definitions, what we call things, these were decided upon by our original laboratory members to really try to hash things out so that we were using the same language. They provide counting examples in a number of ways. How do you go ahead and record the data? As I said, over that period of time, we have quite a few submissions that started very modestly, but last few years we've been growing and growing. 139 laboratories this past year. Out of those 139 laboratories, 116 of those are from the United States. Over the entire panel of data, we have over 700 submissions that have gone in. And with the emergence of Foresight 2020, and this is the project that is being funded by the Laura and John Arnold Foundation through ASCLD, it will be much, much simpler for everybody to get involved. Now, the URL that I have there just takes you to the program website, which has all kinds of things, but it describes this in much more detail. So if you're not as familiar with Project Foresight, I really invite you to go and visit at any point in time. You'll also have my contact information, so if you are interested in your laboratory becoming involved, just contact me. So what do we have with this? Well, we've collected a lot of data. We certainly have not analyzed every question that's involved. My background, as you saw, I'm trained as an economist. I work out of a finance department with this, and so naturally the research that I go into is going to be more towards those areas of interest. But some of my colleagues have looked at things from an accounting perspective, others from strategy and human resource issues. So you'll see that there's a variety of things that have been done, but there's a lot of questions that we simply have not addressed. And in fact, we get our research notions primarily from people who participate in the study. They say, well, I'd like to know this. So for example, one laboratory that had a very high level of turnover believed that the effect of alternative laboratories for somebody to go work was really a drain on their personnel, is that they would spend the time training them, and they wanted to know what would happen if we began to pay everybody in the laboratory a little bit more. We were able to go in and take a look at that and make some predictions in terms of what would happen with turnover, and they were successful in getting that. But we need the questions from individuals to go ahead and find some of these things out. Some of the things that we're looking at now, there's our early work. We did a decomposition. What happens when you get a financial ratio? How do you interpret it? How do you look at your own laboratory? So we've written some papers on that. Some of the current research that we're working on has been particularly important is what happens when you begin to attack backlogs. And we've developed a metric we refer to as the queuing elasticity of demand, but it's basically predicting when you knock down your backlog and reduce, say, turnaround time, what can you expect to happen in terms of submissions to the laboratory? And it does have quite an impact on that, where you can begin to predict what resource needs are there. Now, as I said, the Foresight 2020 project will make this much easier. This is, again, a project that was funded through ASCLD. The Laura and John Arnold Foundation, very generous in terms of what they've put together here. And the idea is to work with the major LIMS providers to be able to provide freeware. So when laboratories, if you're using, say, Porter Lee or any of the others, that you could go to them and say, well, we'd like to be able to extract this. Not only does it put out the data from Project Foresight, but reports that you might have, say, on a grant to NIJ, it's going to be able to provide those in a much easier format to be able to spit it right into the format that's required, and it allows for real-time analysis. And I'll show you some of the shots from what a dashboard would look like so that managers within the laboratory can really keep track of quite a few things. So that's kind of the background here. Now, I've got some graphics that I want to run through here on some of the data from Project Foresight. And I'll look at this in three areas with respect to opioids. We break down our data into 19 different areas of investigation, but I'm going to talk about three of these here today. First of these would be drugs, controlled substances, and then we'll also take a look at toxicology antemortem and toxicology postmortem in some of the conversations. So let me point you to a little bit that we have going on in here with respect to this graphic. Now, what we have on the left-hand side here is we're trying to take a look at the total expenditures just within that area of investigation, and I have it for the average laboratory. Here I'm using the median laboratory within the Foresight study as that measure of average. So it's not the arithmetic mean, but the median, so that we don't have any of the really small laboratories pulling this down or the very large laboratories perhaps pulling this up. So, half are larger and half are smaller. And what you can see here is if you go from very early on in looking at 2009, if you look at the expenditures versus what they were through 2016, what we've observed is there's been roughly a 98% growth in the total expenditures that have happened within the average laboratory. And yes, part of this could be inflation, but even when you pull out inflation over that period of time is actually very, very low. So that doesn't explain very much of it. There is a lot more activity going on in the average laboratory. So while we have not, in this data, in the data that we collect in Foresight, while it doesn't isolate this with respect to the particular drugs, just the activity going into that area. Now we'll see that with Foresight 2020, we're going to be able to go a little bit more deeply. So first thing we want to think about here is, if we could bring up the first poll questions, is just your general knowledge of this and these metrics is to try to get a sense here of what is the average cost for a forensic laboratory to process a drugs-controlled substances case. So I've given you three choices here. Go ahead and put in your result in there, or your best guess of this, and we'll talk about it.
Dr. Speaker, it does look like all the results have come in.
All right, let's go ahead and move on then. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we had in there. One of the things that you'll notice is that the three values that I gave you actually come from our annual report for that fiscal year 2016. And so I provided there, that's the second of the links that I have. You are certainly welcome to a copy of that report and what we put out there, and all of the preceding year's reports are also available from the Foresight page. But what you're going to see is that the three values that I showed you there represent the 25th percentile, the median, and the 75th percentile. So that middle value gives you an idea on what we discovered in terms of what was typical of laboratories. Now, I throw the question out there because of the importance of understanding where your dollars are going within the laboratory. So if you think of this, we refer to something in economics as the opportunity cost. Since laboratory budgets are not unlimited, you are then subject to the same things you have anywhere else in the economy, and that is what is referred to as the economic problem, that we have unlimited desires and we have limited resources. So when the laboratory decides to take on another case, or it's decided for them to take on another case, what you find is that the rise in this area has a very particular opportunity cost that we can represent in dollar terms, and that's what that middle value was, but it also means that money can't be spent elsewhere. And it's a drain, and when we talk about a drain on resources, it's beginning to understand where this is going, is that money is not available to do other things as this goes on. So to give you a little bit of an idea on this, what's happening with that average cost, the one we just showed as being a little bit under $350 per case, this is part of what's gone over time here. Now, these early years, a little bit of jumping around, it's a fairly small sample. But when you get from 2011 on, we have some nice large sample properties, and what you'll notice is that there's been a fairly significant rise in the average cost of processing a case. In fact, it's gone up 86% over this 2009 to 2016 period. So if we have that on the average case, and we have a growth on a lot of cases, that begins to explain why the expenditures are so much higher from the prior slide. Other things that we have in here is not that the laboratories are sitting on their hands. We're also finding that across laboratories, there's been a 47% growth in productivity. So not only are the demands coming through in the labs, and it's getting costlier, but the personnel in the laboratory are also doing a bang-up job, in a sense here, of being able to process more and more cases over time. So the demand for services that we're having here are growing, and this is per person that's working within that drugs, controlled substances section of the laboratory. At the same time, we're finding that turnaround time is growing longer. And so what we're seeing is that the press on the resources of the labs means that you're beginning to see a greater backlog, and we're seeing it taking longer and longer to be able to move these cases through. So this 50% growth over that same period in average turnaround time has an impact. And it's really trying to figure out what is this going to be to the particulars of the opioid crisis. It's buried within this. So there are other things that are certainly happening, but that certainly is a piece of it. So just curious with respect to your experience and what goes on in your laboratory, if we could bring up the second of the poll questions here, which is just what has happened to your experience, and here looking at toxicology, antemortem, if this is an area of yours, has it increased? Is it going down? Is it unchanged? Any sense of what's going on from your laboratory? And it's okay if you don't know. One of the things that we want to point out is, of course, the importance of understanding not only where things have been, but where they're headed. The units here on the turnaround time is days. Okay, now that we're seeing the results, it's interesting that the experience you can see there is very similar to what we're seeing overall, is that we're finding largely increases. In many cases, people don't really know what's going on, but learning more about this and where this is headed is a fairly important result, and wanted to get a little bit of a sense of where you are with respect to that. So let's talk just a little bit about toxicology, antemortem. Postmortem is also very similar to the antemortem results. So So over that period of time, looking at it from 2008 through 2015, total expenses in toxicology have grown by 157%. Cost per case has grown about 19% over that period of time. Productivity, and that's in the cases processed per FTE in the laboratory, has grown by 29%, and average turnaround time has gone up by 143%. So a little bit more dramatic in some of the areas than we were seeing overall there. Now, what I'd like to do, though, is to isolate now, rather than talking about just laboratories in general, is isolate one laboratory that is in a region that would certainly be described as being part of the opioid crisis. So what I've done is I pulled this through. One of the things that we're very careful to do in Project FORESIGHT is we keep all of our laboratories anonymous. The only time that we would point out a specific laboratory is when they've given us permission to do that. So we do try to make sure we keep everything as private information as possible so that the laboratory can learn and we don't end up putting somebody out of sorts. So this was very interesting when I pulled this up. So here I've got an individual laboratory, and if you take a look at the data here, this is looking at its real cost per case over time. So by real, that means inflation adjusted. So what I do is I go in there and I simply pull out whatever the consumer price index inflation rate was and put it all in 2016 dollars. And what you'll notice for this laboratory is that it had its real cost back in 2011 being roughly $380 per case, and here we go down in 2016 and it's under $330 per case, and it's a very steady decline. But what we want to talk about is that seems to go against the grain, and I want to make a point about something in economics called economies of scale. Is you've got to be very careful if you try to compare your laboratory to simply the average laboratory. And what we know is there's a thing in any type of business called the economies of scale. There's a right size to be. There's an ideal size. And so when we take a look at the economies of scale, what we do is we begin to get a sense of what's going over on. So if I look across the industry and I try to map out behavior, what we would tend to see is that as a laboratory gets larger, that it begins to experience lower average costs up to a point. And then a laboratory could actually be too big and would see its costs rise. So we expect to see something of a U-shaped curve going on here where as the caseload increases, the average cost decreases. And then beyond a certain point, we're going to begin to see that go back up. Now, in the case of drugs, controlled substances, we haven't seen that uptick quite yet, the size of that. So it turns out that a laboratory could be fairly substantial in size and still be able to see its costs go down. Now, I refer to this as the efficient frontier. So if you are one particular laboratory, what you want to know is where are you performing? What is your average cost versus your caseload? So at, say, 5,000 cases, if you found that it was costing you some $500 per case, we would say that efficient is going to be down here more at around $340 per case. So where do you have room to improve would be on any of those types of issues. And so for this trial laboratory in the opioid region, what we were seeing is that its caseload is going way up, and so its reductions in cost that we saw on the prior slide are more of a product of the level of its caseload rather than simply decreasing costs going on. So here we go again with this same average laboratory here, and what I want to look at is its total expenditures year by year. And you can see that although its average cost per case was declining rather dramatically, its total expenditures went from about $1.3 million up to nearly $2 million in a very, very short period of time. And this is what we talk about the drain on resources, is that more has to keep going here. While average costs are falling, their total expenditures were rising. Here we go, taking a look at that caseload over time. So year by year down here, and here are the number of cases. So going from 3,000 to almost 6,000 cases over a very short period of time. So from 2011 to 2016, close to a doubling of the caseload. Okay. Now, productivity, on the other hand, and this is the number of cases per person, we find that the laboratory is not only processing a lot more, so is the average individual, is that they are getting more and more done. So in 2011, we find that the rise from approximately 350 cases per person to now up to 500. So the demands on the individuals in the laboratory are becoming rather severe. And with productivity going up nearly 50%, I think just earlier today I had a conversation with one laboratory about this, is there too much strain on the personnel? What's going to be happening with turnover? What kinds of things, what are the limits to what you can expect? And so it's really kind of tracking those issues that becomes fairly important. There's a similar efficient frontier that you would have for a laboratory in terms of productivity. What is the best that you can expect? So here it also has a similar facet to that economies of scale. It would be a mirror image where ultimately it's going to hit some high point and then it's going to begin to decline. That a laboratory can get too big. So this is how many cases per FTE can be expected. And for any laboratory, you want to be able to see that you'd love to be as close to this as possible. If you're a little bit above it, that's not a problem. If you get too far above it, it may be a problem in terms of what you're doing to your personnel. Okay, so now just a little bit about Foresight 2020. As I said, with the data that we have here, I'm able to tease a little bit out of it for these areas, but not the specifics for just things that are related to the opioid crisis. This is just all submissions that are to these particular areas, whether it be the toxicology areas or drugs and controlled substances. Now, Foresight 2020 allows us to extract much, much more refined data. The tough part for laboratories has been how many things can you fill out in a survey? And Project FORESIGHT asks for a lot of data. If we wanted to then go into each area and try to separate by the type of case that was involved, it would just be too onerous for a laboratory to be able to complete on its own. But with Foresight 2020, it'll allow us to be able to go in and extract very specific questions without anything other than push of a couple buttons for the laboratory itself. They don't have to spend a lot of time digging through files. So we could ask, rather than all drug or tox cases, we could talk about those that are opioid-related cases. We don't have to talk about things just on an annual basis that we collect now, but you could go further and say, well, what's it done this month or this quarter or over any period of time that you want? And the laboratory could be able to take a look at this by dashboards where you could have some real-time things just where you're answering your own questions. So I've got a couple samples of some of the early work that we've done on this to give you a feel. Now, if you take a look at this first dashboard, this is just general information running into the laboratory. So this first area here is just talking about how many cases over what period of time. So you can select the period of time. From what date to what date do you have things? How many cases do you have in total? How many cases do you have for particular areas of investigation? What about the requests from within those cases? How many pieces of evidence do you have in there? You can track all kinds of things. You can split it out here. These are simply showing graphically what's happening over periods of time with respect to specific areas of investigation. Okay, so that's just general information within the lab. If you're talking about the Project FORESIGHT data, this uses, while the prior one uses the language that the laboratory has always used, here it converts everything to the measures, the common kinds of measures that we use in Project FORESIGHT. So again, breaking down by each area of investigation, we could get the case count, we could get the questions by areas with respect to, pieces of evidence that are submitted. We could look at the counts on the number of tests for each of those areas, and we can look at turnaround time. So it's got a separate sheet over here that allows you to be able to look in here just with respect to FORESIGHT data. And then for the problem at hand here, if you wanted very, very specific things for each unit, we could break things down here in terms of the service requests or cases versus, particular units that you would have for this, or how much evidence. And you could look at this in various forms, either tabularly or graphically. Here we've got one where we're simply looking at, say, not just within areas of investigation, but this is looking at sexual assault kits. Let's extract those. So we could do something like that for the particular issue that we have here in taking a look at the opioid crisis. So it does give us a great deal of flexibility in terms of where we're going in the future and the ability to break down to the time periods. Now, I know this is a lot in a short period of time, so one of the things I would invite you to is we've published about 30 different articles now using the data from Project FORESIGHT. So I've provided the URL for our publication page, and what you'll find in here is you just scroll through. It's done in reverse chronological order, so you'll find the most recent things first. Some by myself, some by some of my colleagues that have been involved with data on the projects. Many of those things are available through ASCLD with respect to forensic science policy and management. Others that you're going to be able to find, some at your local libraries, others on some of the basic research pages. Some of the other things that we're doing, that we're looking at, again, much of this came from conversations that I had earlier with representatives from Forensic Technology Center of Excellence, where what can our data do? So some of the questions that we've thrown out there that we'd like to take a look at here is expanding across a number of areas that you have here, that are related to the opioid crisis. So what is the social cost? Now, the argument with a lot of this from our standpoint is to show what it costs once it reaches the laboratory. Hopefully what you find is, when you get an idea of what that opportunity cost is, it can be compared to other alternatives in dealing with the crisis, and in particular, prevention. So how do you keep it from getting here? What's the cost of greater investment, say, in mental health facilities, or finding better ways to get treatment for folks, or to stop things to begin with? We can talk about what the societal costs are going to be here, looking directly at the laboratory, but looking at things like first responders, or areas that go over into education, say public health laboratories. We can really put some things out in terms of that cost-benefit alternatives here. Likewise for emerging drugs. So what other things do we have out there? We're collecting, how are policies and procedures changing? What's being done for emergency preparedness, to deal with these kinds of things. These are some of the issues that we've thrown out that we're looking at in this area. And of course, we continue our research projects elsewhere. Okay, well, I'm going to stop preaching and take some questions here. So I notice we do have a few questions started. Josh, if you want to go ahead and we'll move with those, I'm all ready for you.
Yes, sir. We do already have some great questions for you, Dr. Speaker. The first one came very early in the webinar. Are there things that private companies, nonprofits, or individuals could do to help defray the drain on laboratory resources from this opioid epidemic?
Well, there's certainly possibilities for things to come in there, and you do have several foundations that are dealing with this across the broad spectrum. I would say that the ultimate is keep things from getting to this stage is probably where the greatest contributions can come in. But when you take a look at what's happening to laboratory resources, so if you have to double what goes into a particular area, it's got to come from somewhere. And if the budgets are not increased to be able to deal with this, it comes from other areas of the laboratory. It's got to come from something that's happened there. Now, I know in some states they've been successful in getting reparation from, for at least the laboratory's expense from going to court, and it's been in terms of substance abuse, whether it be alcohol or drugs, that probably the greatest collections have come. But I think you'll find if you begin to look across the great stretch of the literature that we have here, if you can keep it from getting to the point where it does come to the laboratory, you probably find the greatest returns we're going to get overall. I think one of the most interesting ones was what was done in Manchester, New Hampshire, with respect to the fire departments and finding a place for somebody that knows they have a problem to go get help in a very trusted location, so you never get to that point.
Okay. Next is a comment, and we also had quite a few other individuals that spoke on this as well. New York State Police have seen over a fourfold increase in fentanyl cases. Dr. Speaker, what has been the increase in cases seen in Foresight?
Well, we're not at this point able to break it down to something specific like fentanyl. So that's one of the things that we would be able to do with the 2020 project. So all I can say here is that the total number of cases coming in is increasing dramatically. Of course, the fentanyl has been one of the big problems in our state here in West Virginia, where you've just had, terrible bunch of overdoses that were happening in bunches, particularly in the western part of the state. But at this point, we're not able to pull that specific information out.
All right. Just to kind of elaborate on the turnaround time, it looks like everyone that did comment their turnaround times have increased dramatically, except for one laboratory that said Dayton, Ohio turnaround time has actually decreased due to evolving testing methods.
Mm-hmm.
Next question we do have is... Oh, go ahead, Dr. Speaker. I'm sorry.
Those are the kinds of things when you... that's one of the reasons that we created the Project Foresight to begin with, is to get some of the good stories out there, to find out what's happening that's been successful. How do we find ways to be able to share it? So I would love to hear from the folks from Dayton as to what they've done differently. That'd be great information to be able to share with everyone.
All right. Next question we have, do you have representation from both private and governmental laboratories in Project Foresight?
We have some private laboratories that have been involved. The tough part with private laboratories is of course, sharing the financial information becomes really tough. So one of the things that we did is we created a vehicle a corporate entity for private laboratories to be able to submit data that could only come in an anonymous fashion. One of the things we do find with the private laboratories, so I mentioned this notion of economies of scale, private laboratories tend to be right-sized. They tend to be the size that's close to perfect to be able to get the average cost down as low as possible. So I think in the 2016 fiscal year data, 3 of the 139 laboratories are private. The rest are governmental.
All right. Next question we have is from Kimberly Ross. When you say case, are you referring to one case with one sample, or are you looking at individual samples, such as could one case contain 50 samples?
Yeah, the terminology that we use with case, this actually is a byproduct of a study that was done in Europe in 2002. So there's 2 notions of a case, what they refer to as an institute case and what is known as an area case. So an institute case would be some crime has been committed, and that would be one institute case. When I use the term case, I refer to an area case, so it may have evidence that's going to go to, say, several areas of investigation with the lab. It might go to drugs, controlled substances. It may also go to DNA casework. So we would treat it as a measure, as a case in each of those areas. Within a particular case, we'll count how many items of evidence were submitted. We'll count from those items of evidence, how many items of evidence are actually examined within the laboratory, and how many samples are taken from those items of evidence. So yes, you could have a case in which a gym bag was found and it had 50 packets of some white substance in it. So we would have the single item, the gym bag, but we would have say 50 samples being extracted from within that.
All right. Next question we have is involving cost. What's all involved with the calculating of the cost per test?
Okay, so this is what we would refer to as a fully loaded cost. So when we go ahead and do that, what we're looking at for the laboratory is, first of all, personnel. So on personnel expenditures, this would be all salary, benefits, overtime, anything that they've had on a personnel expenditures. For capital expenditures, we're going to look at equipment purchases over a 5-year period, and it's a kind of a moving average that goes along with that. And we do use that as the expenditure because that's what the IRS says for anybody to do for laboratory equipment. We measure the consumables across the laboratory. Gases, chemicals, et cetera, that are going to fit in there. And we also include all overhead expenditures that you're going to have. So that's, from training and education to heating, cooling, telecommunications, other overhead charges that might fit in for the facility. So when we have the cost, we're going to take that total expenditure. It's going to be divided into each area of investigation, and then we're going to look at the number of cases within that area and divide those costs up for the per case.
All right. Just to follow up, you had asked regarding Dayton, Ohio. Dayton, Ohio actually responded saying we were able to combine some of our old methods into one method. For example, we combined the cocaine analysis with our amphetamine analysis. Our stimulant method now covers both cocaine and metabolites in addition to amphetamines, methamphetamines, etc. In addition, we were able to validate methods that require less instrument time, allowing an analyst to complete an extraction beginning to end more quickly.
Excellent. That's a kind of story that forensic science policy and management would love to be able to hear, to be able to share those kinds of results. I would say contact Max Hauk with the notion that you have there.
All right, next question comes from Dennis Hilliard. From the lab perspective, the increase in drug and toxicology submissions are a direct and obvious impact. Less obvious and maybe more difficult to prove is the association with opioids. Is the increase of DNA cases and increases in general of all areas, many of these are property crimes. Can the foresight data help with making these associations?
Yeah, the foresight data and that's one of the things that we're working on when I had mentioned the queuing elasticity, is we're able to split things down, and Foresight 2020 makes it even a finer split, but to the point that we can begin to really predict where things are going to be going. What's the causal relationship? We can measure on that. Some of the econometrics that we use helps to point some of these things out. So yes, we'll be able to do more and more with this, but the Foresight 2020 is really kind of critical to be able to get to those finer levels.
And just mentioning Foresight 2020, Ray Wickenheiser said, FYI, AskClad is moving Foresight 2020 to test labs now, and we project to have this freeware product available next year.
Yeah, we've been quite fortunate with the number of laboratories that volunteered to do the beta testing on this. So that is underway, and we're hoping by this time next year that we've got it available to any laboratory that wants to participate.
All right, great. Next question. Has there been any studies to determine how much more money is being spent per case since the opioid crisis? More and better PPE, two analysts on a case, etc.
Just the data that I was showing there can show you a little bit over time. While it can't isolate it for the opioid crisis specifically, it can talk over that period of time what has happened in these areas of investigation. We'll kind of see where that goes. It's one of the proposals that we've put out to Forensic Technology Center of Excellence to be able to look and dig into the research a little bit more than what I've shown you.
All right. Next question that we have out is from Dennis DeLuca, saying he is a PhD from Ohio Northern University. What is the standardized method of calculating caseload, i.e. number of items, backlog, or calculation per analyst and chemist?
The per is simply we look at the total within an area of investigation and divide that by the number of FTE that have been allocated there. So it's a fairly simple metric to be able to look at. It's also the kind of metric, though, that can be brought down to measuring the individual with that. There's some advantages that you do have in looking at productivity levels per individual with it. You get a sense of the balance that you have in performance within the laboratory. You can also find areas of potential problems with that. But it's simply kind of breaking that down by FTE.
All right, we've had some fantastic interaction so far. We still have a few people typing, so we're going to give them a couple of more minutes just to be able to type in their questions. While we are waiting on those questions to come in, just make reference below at the very bottom of your screen. You will find Dr. Speaker's email address there, so you can contact him directly if you have any questions after the webinar. We also have the 3 web links there in the bottom of the middle of your screen that Dr. Speaker had mentioned during his presentation, and then on the bottom right hand side of your screen you will see a PDF version of today's slide deck. So you simply click on that file and click the download files button at the very bottom, and you can download the PDF directly from the room before you even leave today. It looks like we have a couple of people typing in. We're going to let those people finish up their questions. Dr. Speaker, do you want to elaborate on anything or leave us with any kind of tidbits before we move into our closing?
Just a comment, I would like to reiterate a couple of the things we have there is, by all means, please visit our site and get a sense of some of the things that we've been working on. But when anybody listening, if you have issues that you'd really like to know the answer to, we survive, our research really survives on what the community needs. And so when it's something where our data is, might help to be able to answer a question, we really encourage you to ask us, to say, can you find this out? And that's where our publications to date have largely come from, what we find as issues in the community. Now, a couple of the things that happened simply because I turned into a bit of an economics geek with this, where I got to see things in the data that I know theoretically are true and you can't ever observe in the for-profit market. So I found some fascinating things that I've discovered by accident, but most of it is pushing us in those directions, and I encourage you, don't be shy, and if your lab has not yet participated in Foresight, please take a look at that. It's no one has been charged a penny for participation. The report that I referenced, the annual report, we actually individualize those for every laboratory, insert their data in it so that they've got something that's fairly easy to be able to deal with. So I encourage you to follow up with those.
All right, we had one comment, and then we will finish with one last question before we move into our closing. The comment was, being a privately owned lab, we are in a slightly different situation. However, we have found excellent cost reduction and increases in productivity in employing lean practices to our sample prep and extraction procedures. Automation has gone a long way in creating a more seamless process. And then Dayton, Ohio added that many of their analysis have been moved to LC-MS-MS, which produce faster run times.
Yeah,
All right,
just
last question we have.
in terms
Go ahead, I'm sorry, Dr. Speaker.
I was going to say, with respect to the lean technologies, that's actually the project that I'm currently working on is how much can you gain from a lean technology? So, to be able to look before somebody jumps into a particular project, what can you hope to be able to gain from it? So it's a great one to be able to take a look at. We'd like to be able to predict ahead of time for you what your gains would be. So that's literally what I'm writing this month, is to get that paper completed. Go ahead, Josh.
All right, last question we have for the day. Have you seen any one big idea that lowers turnaround times for lab, other than major increases in personnel and instrumentation or major reductions in submissions?
The biggest things that we've seen have been some process improvement, just general process improvement, to kind of take a look at how the flow is through the laboratory, and really adjusting things correspondingly with that by, asking if you've been doing something a certain way for a long time, how long has it been since you just kind of reviewed how things kind of work their way through with that. And those have been the biggest gains, not any one answer to that, but the idea of continually going back and taking a look at process.
All right, we're going to go ahead and move on to our closing now with that. Obviously, the first thing we would like to do is to thank Dr. Paul Speaker for his presentation today, all of the research that he's done, Project FORESIGHT, Foresight 2020. These are going to be great things for the forensic industry as a whole. So, Dr. Speaker, thank you so much for taking the time to present your information today.
Yeah, my pleasure.
We would also like to take this time to thank all of our attendees for joining us today. Obviously, these webinars would not be possible without your attendance and support. Before you leave today's webinar, we do ask that you participate in our short customer satisfaction survey. You will find the link there in the closing slides. If you simply click on the word here, it will open a new window for you. Your feedback about our webinars is vital information that we use very regularly to provide you the best webinar experience and also to adjust any content and the way we disseminate the information to you, our audience. So if you could please take a few moments to complete that survey, we would definitely appreciate it. We are we do have our new website up, so we would like for you obviously to go check out our website. We are all over social media now. We have our Facebook page, YouTube channel. We are on Twitter, so we are tweeting regularly. If you want to be able to follow everything that the FTCOE is putting out, we would definitely like to see you all over our social media campaigns as well. We do have the file, today's PDF version of the slide deck there in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen now. I will leave the room open for a few minutes just so you can make sure that you have that downloaded before you leave today. Again, thank you to Dr. Speaker for your presentation. Thank you for all of our attendees for joining us today, and we hope everyone has a great afternoon.